But what's even more cool is what Nick did. Was assistant professor of machine learning and data science at Erasmus University of Rotterdam. Is use ChatGPT as your future TA. So I want to hand it off to Nick so he can showcase what he can do with it.
Excellent. Okay, so I was approached a few days ago, so I showed a little bit what I've been doing with ChatGPT, and then I was asked if I could also tell a bit about what I've been doing. So this will be about grading with ChatGPT. And let me give you some context. So the task that I had was that I recently had an introduction to programming exam. And the exam was sort of open text questions, some theory questions, and also some programming questions in Java. It's a Java Introduction to Programming course. This course was about 2 hours. It was closed off, so the students did not have access to ChatGPT. So it's actually their own code that they handed in there. And it was taken by about 400 students. And it was graded by TAs who use autotests as inputs. It's a setup I use for my exams. And while the TAs were busy grading, and have an army of about 15 TAs who grade this for me, I was thinking about, oh, can I somehow use ChatGPT here to help? So, well, the main idea I had was, oh, can I sort of grade the entire exam with ChatGPT? But I've had some experience with that, but it seems to be unreliable for now. Though, of course, we shouldn't put the bars too high. Grading ourselves or with TAs is also not perfectly reliable. Humans also make big mistakes. Some intermediate ideas that I have so far that, well, maybe you can grade with ChatGPT and then use that as input for human grading. Or maybe having graded by a TA or by me and then verifying with ChatGPT if I miss anything. Yes, those are some ideas that are definitely feasible at the moment, I think. And I'll show you some things in a moment. Or maybe doing both of these. So first, have ChatGPT grade the exam, and then have a human look at it manually, and then again verifying on top of that. Okay, so my progress in this so far is not finished yet. I haven't actually graded the entire exam of ChatGPT yet, but I've done quite a bit of experiments, and I want to run it soon. So overall, what I found is sort of plain use of ChatGPT is pretty bad. So if you just use like the website chat.openai.com, if you just sort of paste in there, especially if you use the free version, things are not very good. It's quite time intensive to do. You have to copy paste in all these student answers and what the question was, etc. And the memory is quite limited. It remembers about 4,000 words approximately. So, well, it starts forgetting things, and it becomes pretty difficult to work with. And overall, the quality is also quite mediocre and inconsistent. But recently, I got access to the GPT-4 API, which allows, which gives much better results. So first of all, using the API calls, I can simply just run ChatGPT inside a script that I wrote myself. So I can sort of write a script that runs over all these students' codes and throws it into GPT automatically. Using the API, you have access to system message instructions, which are instructions that ChatGPT listens to much more carefully. So if you just chat with ChatGPT, it doesn't, well, of course, it listens to what you say, but if you have a system message, it listens much more carefully, and it will abide your instructions much more carefully. And overall, I find that the quality is also much better. It's much better at detecting mistakes in code and those kind of things as well. There's a downside of using the API, namely that it's not super expensive, but it is costly. I estimate the costs at the moment for my current setup to be about €1 per student per exam. So if you've got about 400 students, that will be about €400, which is a lot cheaper than grading it yourself or grading with TAs. But if you make mistakes, you have to do this many times, it can become relatively expensive. So you should test it a lot before you do something like this. So that's what I did. I took 3 students that I happened to have graded myself, and I used those students to their exams and their results to sort of fine-tune the process and see how far I can get with this. And I'll show you the ideas and results I have so far. So my setup so far requires quite a lot of so-called prompt engineering, so sort of very careful instructions of exactly what you want ChatGPT to do for you. And the main component of it is the system message that I set up. And in the system message, what I put in there is general grading instructions. I'll show you in a moment what my general grading instructions are so far. Question-specific instructions, so maybe some specifics about this question, what I should be extra careful about. The question itself, I also put it in a system message. Like, hey, this is the question. I give a reference answer and an output format. So I wanted to give feedback and points in a certain output format, so that I can then use regular expressions to extract the points and the feedback easily from the output format. So one issue with ChatGPT is that if you ask it the same question twice, its output is very different. The output format is very different. So you have to be very careful in instructing it a certain format. Otherwise, you have to somehow extract these points and this feedback from the response message that you get, which is quite difficult. So instructing the output format really helps here. And what I've been experimenting with more recently is also pre-appending the chat. So in the API, beyond sending a system message with sort of like instructions that it has before the chat starts, you can also already put some part of the conversation you can already sort of like fix into the system before the actual chat starts. So what I did, I already gave it an example of a student answer, which I sort of crafted a little bit that it has some nasty mistakes. And I also gave an example of a desired output on the student answer, so how much points I would want it to give and what kind of errors, how it should handle those errors that the student made in order to, well, even help a little bit further to grade here. But even without this pre-appending of the chat, just a system message works pretty well, but this makes it even a little bit better. So let me show you what kind of instructions I give ChatGPT. So first of all, so here you can see, first of all, I instructed first line that it is an expert teacher in the grading introduction to programming exam. This is very important. If you don't tell it it's an expert, actually it won't behave like an expert. So telling it that it's an expert is actually very important. I give it some, tell it what it's being given, so the grading instructions, the question, etc. I give it a task, so I want to give short textual feedback. I'll later give the format as well. I wanted to, this is very important, I wanted to deliberate about the points before it actually gives the points. This makes the quality much better as well. And more instructions about the students have limited time for the exam, so typos and small errors are not important, or things that a point should be allocated based on whether a student did a good attempt at a question. So if you don't give these instructions, in my experience, ChatGPT becomes very nitpicky. It starts picking out lots of small details and start punishing the students very harshly for these small details. So I had to come up with a lot of instructions that seem to work fine. And so far, this works pretty well. So let me show you an example of a student answer that I have. So one of the questions on the most recent exam was to find the second largest number on an array of integers. And this is an answer the student gave. And there's two errors in this code. I won't really go into depth about it, but here the second largest number is initialized in an unfortunate way, which in some edge cases can cause issues. And also the strict inequality here should be a weak inequality. Or actually, you can never actually remove the entire second component there. It's completely unnecessary. Yes, the second largest wrongly initialized and the super fluent comparison there on the right. Okay, so then I fed this to GPT, and well, let's look at the type of feedback that it gives here. So first of all, it says, well, good job, overall approach. You can see the output structure that I asked for you. So first I asked for feedback, then for point deliberation here in blue, and then finally I asked for the points. And you can see here at the two red arrows that as a second bullet point here, it says that, oh, you initialize the largest and second largest numbers to be equal to the first element of the array, and this can cause issues, with some explanation of why this can cause issues, which is exactly the first error that I pointed out there at the top in the student code. And the third bullet point here, we can see that in an oh, okay, let me put my mouse here. In an if-else statement, well, this the second error, it also finds that second error, and it says that you might want to give some feedback around it as well. And then finally, it gives a point deliberation. It explains, well, what happened here and what the feedback was, and sort of summarizes it, and then deliberates by the points and decides to give 3 points out of 4 points. So overall identifies that the idea of the code is correct. The overall approach of the code seems to work pretty well. It identifies both the errors that the student made, and it turns out these 3 points are exactly the number of points that I'd already given as well. So I graded these students myself before I started using ChatGPT, and I also happened to give 3 points to this exact student as well. Okay, so some more findings so far. So overall, I've been quite impressed. I don't have time to show you many more examples, but I'll summarize some things. So overall, it's able to deal with answers that have very serious issues. So one interesting example is that I had one student who answered question 1A and question B, both under question 1A. But ChatGPT had no issue with this whatsoever. And so it just identified that part of the answer was actually an answer to part 1B, and without any mention, it just graded it. It can also deal with code that does not compile at all, and this is a big improvement compared to unit tests in some sense. Of course, a unit test is more intricate. You can test more specific things with that, and it's more reliable. But I had some situations where students handed in some code. They only had 2 hours for the exam, so some of them got a bit of stress, and they handed in some code that didn't compile, and there were lots of strange issues in the code. But GPT was still able to sort of see that the overall idea of the code was pretty good, so they still got partial credit for the question. I can deal with very creative solutions, but some students had very strange solutions, but apparently it was able to identify that it is actually a correct approach and that it does seem to work. And it also, of course, it's also important that it doesn't give full points for everything. It's also seen very capable of giving very low points for long nonsense answers. And some students like to give sometimes. If they've got no idea what the answer is, they just start writing something. And ChatGPT has no issue with saying, well, it's just nonsense, you get 0 points for this. Also, there's no issue with answers in a different language. So my exam was half of it was in English, and for the other half of the students took the course in Dutch. It could also handle that. Also more findings. So overall, it's quite some work to instruct it properly. Well, with some experience, it becomes a lot easier, but to figure out how to do it in a proper way, that took me quite a bit of work, a few days of prompt engineering. But now I think I've got this workflow that I showed you that seems to work pretty well. And some issues that I encountered are that, for example, it punished students pretty hardly for continuation errors. So I had some situations where part B depended on part A, but I told the students you can just make part B without making part A, and just call the function that you should have made in a part A, just call it in your part B. And for some reason, ChatGPT kept punishing the student, even if I explicitly told it not to. But well, with some extra, making this a little bit more explicit and adding to the question-specific instructions that this should not happen, eventually this was possible to resolve this. And also I noticed that it's overly harsh on style sometimes, even if I explicitly say it, that does not matter. So you have to be really explicit about these things sometimes. So fine-tuning this is quite a bit of effort. So you can't just say, oh, these are the questions, these are the answers, and just feed all the students exams to it. It doesn't really know what you want it to do, so it will be very harsh sometimes on things that you don't want it to be harsh on. So maybe that type of calibration is the most difficult thing. But overall, I've been able to resolve all these issues that I had so far. So what's next? So I'm currently still working on fine-tuning this further, and then my plan is to run it on all 400 students that took the exam, and then eventually compare it, the grading quality to how the TAs grade it, and see if it at least somewhat corresponds to what they had, and then proceed from there on, and next year hopefully use it in the actual grading process as well.
Thank you so much, Nick. That was really awesome, and thanks also for giving more information about the prompt engineering, and really cool.